And there's this neighbor who like lives across the hall from us. He's about like 60 years old. He basically like comes over and he's just like, oh, like, you back? And I was like, yeah, I just got back, but like I'm just here on holiday. Like I still live in Hong Kong. And he's like, China? And then he goes, isn't that big virus over there? And this is all in French, by the way. And then he starts going on this massive rant. He starts swearing at me in French and starts like yelling at like all these like vulgar things about like how I brought this like fucking virus over. I was so ready to pick a fight too. I was just like, you know what? If I wasn't off this 14-hour flight, I would have picked the fight with you.
You're like, hold my beer.
Dang. Let me argue with this 65-year-old.
Welcome to Proudly Asian, a podcast series that tells bold and proud stories of Asians by Asians. I'm Isabel Wong, a financial journalist who wants to uncover the many Asian stories around us that are waiting to be told. There's never just one way to look at Asians. This podcast will take you through a deep dive into the life stories, struggles, and triumphs of young Asians around the world. On today's episode, we have Carla Martinesi, a half-Swiss and half-Chinese entrepreneur who was born in Hong Kong and grew up all over the world. Having lived in 18 cities across 8 countries, she's now the co-founder and CEO of Chomp, a food-saving mobile app designed to fight food surplus. She talks to us about sustainable living, racism in Europe, and how she navigates between cultures. Welcome back to Proudly Asian. Now, as part of our International Women's Day special series, we are so happy to have Carla with us on this episode, who is a social entrepreneur herself based in Hong Kong. And of course, she has also lived all over the world. So we are so happy to welcome you, Carla.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for stopping by. And I know, as a fun fact, we connected pretty early on during Proudly Asian. You were probably one of our first supporters, friends of Proudly Asian. And then, I just want to quickly ask, how did you discover Proudly Asian?
Big fan. So a friend of mine actually got interviewed by you, Yankee, and so she shared it on her Instagram story, and I was like, oh my god, this is super cool. You were on a podcast, like that's incredible. And she's doing amazing work, and so when she shared it, I started following you, and I was like, this is actually like really cool because there are no podcasts quite like it. And so fangirl moment. And yeah, immediate follow.
I just realized I forced you to compliment the podcast.
It was an honor.
Now, of course, we have much to go through for this episode, but before we get into the serious conversation, right, for our listeners to get to know you better, tell us about your background. Who are you? What are you? And where did you grow up?
I love this. What are you? Human. So I'm Carla. I originally was born in Hong Kong. My dad is Swiss-Italian. He grew up in Italy and moved to Switzerland when he was 18. And my mom is from Hong Kong, born and raised. And I was originally born in Hong Kong, but I grew up pretty much all over the place. My dad was an expat at Nestle, which meant that we had a 3-year contract for every country. So most of our childhood was between all these different places. And actually what was quite funny was when I was born, we weren't living in Hong Kong at the time. We were living in Israel, and my mom didn't want me to be born in Israel. So she took a flight, came to Hong Kong, gave birth. And then as soon as she was good to go, she brought me back to Israel. And yeah, so I mostly grew up in Switzerland because we had to keep coming back for the home base. And then I did my university bachelor degree in Switzerland in hospitality school. And then Yeah, and then I moved to Hong Kong in 2019.
Yeah, I mean, you have lived pretty much all over the world and you finally picked Hong Kong as your current home base. Can you walk us through like why Hong Kong?
So Hong Kong was never a country that we lived in as a family. It was mostly around Europe. So like I think the closest we got to Hong Kong was Russia. So we used to live in Moscow, and that was probably the closest I got to Asia. We came back every year to see my grandparents and my aunties and stuff, but it was never like we were here for like about a week, 2 weeks at the most, and then we'd spend the other week like traveling around Asia, like doing the whole like Thailand, Vietnam touristy thing. And so the reason why I wanted to come back was because I was growing up, I was very detached from my Asian heritage, and I wanted to come back and to reconnect with it and to be closer to my extended family. So there was no hesitation for me. As soon as I graduated, I was like, I'm going back to Hong Kong. Like I did an internship. Part of my degree was to do an internship in hotels, and in 2015, I got a job at Upper House. So I came back for that. I was here for 6 months. I fell in love with it. It was a totally different view to how we did holidays. You know, because when you're here on holiday, you're very much like on holiday mode. Like you don't really think much. But when you're working here, it's totally different. Like you spend your life here, and you know, you wake up here and you have a routine. Like it's very different, and fell in love with it. I decided the minute I left that I wanted to come back, and I wanted to learn Cantonese, and I wanted to reconnect. And
Wow.
yeah.
Wow. So I know that you have lived in 18 cities across 8 countries. So I guess it will put you in a position of being able to rate all the cities that you've lived in. I mean, before we started recording this episode, you were pretty much telling me about the kind of racism that you might have experienced across different places that you grew up in. So can you walk us through what are some of the best places that you lived in and what are some of the worst?
Ooh, tough question. I think the best by far was Paris. I did my last year of high school in Paris, and it was probably one of the greatest years. I made some of my closest friends there, or like I started to really figure out like what I wanted to do. And it was one of the biggest cities I'd lived in at the time, and I was about 17, and that's a really pivotal.
It's like the best year.
Doesn't matter where you are at 17, it's going to be the best year. So yeah, the best was probably Paris. And I felt like a real independence. Like Paris is very like, you know, every woman for herself. Like she's very, you know, this idea of like very kind of Sex in the City vibe, you know, where you're like taking your own train and like you've got your own like routine, and it was very cool. Felt very cool. And I think the worst place, I'm trying to think. I think the worst place was probably going to have to be. There was this one town in Italy that I spent like 3 years in. It's pretty close to Modena. If you know where the balsamic vinegar comes from, Modena. There's a town just outside it called Formigine. It's a horrible place to live in. It's so dead. It's so quiet. I'm probably gonna get roasted for this, but I really hated it.
How dare you?
Yeah, I love that place. My family's from there. No, and also like when I speak Italian, I have a very southern accent. So I got a little bit of heat for like having a weird accent because it's so north. And I really didn't like it growing up there. Like, I went to like an American school, like, and I couldn't get along with people there. Like, I just felt really detached. And we lived in a really like private compound. Like, I didn't like that. I felt very like a little too privileged. Like, it was very like compact. It was full of expats. Like, no one was speaking Italian. It was all like foreigners, who worked for Nestle. Like, I really didn't like it. And yeah, I spent 3 years there. Didn't
It's
like
kind
it.
of like the complex that you lived in was kind of like a staff
Literally,
accommodation.
that's what it felt like.
And I mean, when we were chatting earlier, right, you also did mention a little bit about there was a phase that you went through earlier during your years growing up as a teenager or as a kid that you weren't as proud as, let's say, the Chinese side of yourself. Can you tell us why?
Yeah, it was very weird. I'm the oldest sibling, so my mom had to go through everything with me. And growing up, I was always surrounded by by white kids, and that's all I knew, to be honest. Like there weren't a lot of Asians growing up. There wasn't a very big Asian community, like none of that. And especially in Switzerland, where I have the most memories, that's like that school in particular didn't have that many Asians, or if they did, like there were a few, but they were mostly mainland boarders. Like it was a half boarding school, so there were like mainland Chinese kids, and they came, but they stuck together. And I felt really detached because I didn't speak Mandarin and couldn't really relate, and there was a bit of a language barrier, and so I felt really secluded. And I wanted to fit in with like all the girls in my year so badly, and they were all they were all English or American, and like very predominantly like English speaking only countries. And so in my mind, I went, I only want to speak English. Like I don't want to even learn any other language. Like I refuse. And so mom really tried to speak Cantonese and really tried to like connect her heritage with me, and I refused. I wanted nothing to do with it. I was like, no one else is speaking Chinese. Why do I have to? Like, this is a chore. Like, this is an errand, and this is so much effort for me. And then so it got to a point where she only started using Cantonese to like yell at me. And she would just like, she would use it when she was like out of rage, right? Like, if I did something wrong, or like if I broke the rules or something, she would like be annoyed in Cantonese. And so like the only Cantonese I knew growing up was like swear words. And so I associated with like a bad language. I was like, yeah, so in my mind I was like, ugh, like it's a language you use when you're angry. Like it's a language you use when you're not happy about something. So like why would I want to learn it? And yeah, like we had the typical like cultural days and stuff at school, and like you had to come as the country you represented, and I always picked Italy. I like didn't want. There was one time where I picked Hong Kong, and I brought like I can't even remember. It was something like I brought dim sum or something, like the golden bows, like the deep fried ones with condensed milk.
Oh wow.
And it was my favorite snack growing up. And so I brought it, and people were like, "This is so bland. Like it's so greasy. Like it's so bland." And I felt so like hurt. And I was like, oh my God, like everyone else is bringing like chocolate chip cookies. Like everyone's bringing like banoffee pie cake. Like, damn, that's cool.
Like mac and cheese.
Yeah, literally. And they were bringing like all these like really cool things. And I was like, yeah, well, next year I'm going to bring my Italian side. I'm going to bring like pizza, and I'm going to show them that it's all really cool, you know, and then they'll like me, you know? And I sort of associated that with like not being liked. And sort of associated like my Chinese heritage for being like something that people didn't like. And yeah, so that's kind of where it came from. And I just really wanted to reject it so badly. Like I just wanted to fit in so bad. And I remember there was like the whole Abercrombie and Fitch phase where everybody was like wearing Abercrombie. And when I came here for holiday that year, nobody was wearing it in Hong Kong. It was quite, I think it was a very like, I think it was delayed. And so it was like a big thing in Europe at that point. It was like 2009 or 2008. And I was like, oh, I'm going to be like, it's a very like white thing. Yeah. Like I'm going to wear like all of it. And so I started buying like a bunch of things. And then I was like, oh, I'm still not fitting in. Like I still look different compared to the other girls. I'm going to change my eyeliner, and I'm going to make my eyes look bigger. And I bought like white eyeliner to make my eyes look bigger. Yeah, I'm rolling my eyes, but I don't know why I did that. And I would like try to add lemon juice into my hair to make it lighter. And, you know, I tried so hard to look more white so that I could fit in. And looking back at it, I'm like, that's probably the dumbest thing I could have ever done. But it was so important to me at the time. It was literally my entire identity. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, my mom was, bless her, she was trying so hard to like tell me that I was being dumb, and she was trying really hard to be like, what are you doing? Like, do not do that. Like, don't buy the white eyeliner. It's not going to help. And luckily I didn't go very far to like contact lenses and stuff, but I was trying all these different like foundations and stuff to try and look like, because I was naturally quite tan. Being Chinese and being from the south of Italy, I was quite tanned already at the time. And so I was trying to like try to get like paler foundation, and it was just like, it was such a mess. I don't know how much money I spent on makeup trying to look whiter, and it was just like the worst thing I could have done. But yeah, that was an interesting part of my, it's an interesting phase.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, like, because for yourself, you came from, multiple cultures, right?
Yeah.
And it's just like your experience growing up in Switzerland and in Europe, there are so many layers to it. Like, first, there's the Chinese part, which you used to reject, right? And then because it wasn't embraced by the people around you, and you barely saw any Chinese or Asians around as well. And among Asians, back then, you also didn't speak the language, so you could not really connect with them. And then there's also that, like your father originally from Italy, and then he's somehow an expat, so he also is a foreigner in where you grew up as well. So there's so many layers to it, where you just really can't find that sense of belonging, which was so important to a lot of kids growing up. That's everything. Is I still remember back in the day, like even a little tweak to my hairstyle, and if someone made a comment about it, I would just be completely gutted. Like I'll be so heartbroken, and I'll be like, oh my God, I look ugly.
Same.
Yeah.
100%. 100%. There were so many moments where I was like there was the whole like Converse phase where people were wearing like neon Converse, and I was like, I need to get neon Converse. Like everybody's wearing them. Like I need to get on that. And I was like, I'm gonna look real cool. And then someone insulted it. Like this guy came in who I had a crush on, like came up to me and was just like neon green. And everyone had like neon yellow, like highlighter colors. And I had neon green. And he was like neon green. And I was like, I immediately threw them out. I was like, I don't want this. But because you're so young, you're so easily influenced by like whoever. And also the person who said it, I had a crush on. So I was like, you know what? He's right. Like, throw that out.
Yeah.
But the smallest thing.
Yeah.
Like the color of your shoes, like the tweak in your hair, like none of that actually matters. But
exactly.
You're so young.
Now I don't even brush my hair. I'm just like, deal with it.
Shoes don't have holes in them. It's fine.
Yeah, but then it's just, I mean, bless us, as teenagers, because, I really do remember, now it's bringing back so much memories, for example.
Oh, no.
I need to take a pause and cry. But that is a phase that, a lot of us obviously went through, where we try to reject our own identities and try to fit in, try to like the food that everyone else likes, despite we actually found it a bit like shitty.
Where's the flavor?
But at which point in your life did you realize like, no, I didn't have to do that? And you said to yourself that I need to tap into my heritage so I could unlock the wisdom from my Chinese family. Was there a moment like that for you?
I don't know if it was so much a moment, but it was like a period. So when I finished high school, we were all trying to decide like where to go next. And I only applied to one university, and it was EHL in Switzerland. And I had no doubt in my mind that I wanted to do hospitality. At the time, I didn't know that much about hospitality. I wanted to do something related to food. And that's a whole other story. But I wanted to do something with food. And in my mind, food was associated with restaurants and hotels. And that was where I had the most comfort, like, and airports. I had the most comfort because we were traveling all the time. And in my mind, I sort of went, that's where I want to be. I want to be that person that's at the airport meeting so many different types of people from so many countries, because that's how I grew up. Like, I grew up with all these different people who were like helping me out, providing a service, and like being so kind and so helpful. I want to be that person. I don't know what. I don't know if I'm going to work in a restaurant or if I'm going to work in an airport. Like, I don't know what it is, but I want that. And so I figured out it was called hospitality. And so I applied to the first school I found, which was EHL. I went there. And the first year I was there, I met so many Asians. And I had never seen so many in Switzerland. Because in my mind, Switzerland was this super small village that I grew up in called La Tour de Paix, which is super tiny. Doesn't even show up on a map, but you can find it. And that place it was dead. Like, it was really not that many people. There's like one primary school. There's no McDonald's. There's no Starbucks. It's a super small village. And literally half an hour away at EHL, there was 2,000 people. And most of them were from Asian countries, which some of them I didn't even hear about because I did a Swiss, like in school, we didn't cover that much geography about Asia. So I was like, where are you from? What? That's so cool. And then, and that's where I met like two of my closest friends who are also in Hong Kong, Jackie and Marina. And they were both from Hong Kong. They were in different years, but I hit it off so well with them. And they were telling me about like growing up in like Hong Kong and stuff. And I was like, that's not the Hong Kong I know. The Hong Kong I know is like literally Kennedy Town to Shenyang, because that's where my grandparents used to be. And
it's like the Hong Kong island sites where like expats would hang out, right?
But I didn't put two and two together. It's also like where I didn't realize, but it was where my dad like spent most of his time, because my dad met my mom in Hong Kong. And obviously being a white Italian, he would hang out there, but I didn't put the two together. And, you know, like these girls were telling me about it, and they were like, yeah, like, let me introduce you to my other friends. Like these girls from Vietnam and like Thailand. I was like, oh my God, what? And they were talking about like their home countries with so much like passion, and they loved it. So they were like showing me pictures, and they were just like, yeah. And then like, and the food at the EHL was very like multicultural. Like it was kind of like a food court set up, and you could have like different types of food, and it rotated all the time. And I was like, oh my God, what am I missing? Like, did I really miss this entire part of the world? Because I associated Hong Kong with like that 2-week window in the year where I just went back, saw my grandparents, had like the, you know, big like dim sum set up, had hot pot. Couldn't really talk to them because I didn't speak Cantonese. So I was just sitting there at dinner awkwardly. And I felt like it was really awkward. And you know, and these girls were telling me about it. And I was like, oh. And I remember the moment where like I went back. So my parents were still living, they were still living in Paris at the time, but I went back, I took a trip back to Paris, and I went home and I was telling them about my first year at school. And I was like, guys, there's so many things about Hong Kong that I didn't even know. Like, did you guys know about this? Did you guys know that people hang out in Wan Chai?
Did your mom say like, I told you so?
She was just like, even my dad was just like, yeah, we hang out at Wan Chai. I was like, ooh. And they were telling me all this stuff. And I was like, did you guys know this dish? Like, you know, Jackie was showing me this and didn't even know that was a real thing. And mom was just like, I tried to make it for you like 2 years ago and you said you hated it. And I was like, that's the same dish. And she was like showing me pictures of like my grandma like eating it. And it was, I'm trying to remember what it was now.
I'm curious.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what it was. Oh my God. It was spam and egg instant noodles, you know, at breakfast.
Oh, is it like chandan?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I thought like we would never order it when we were here because mom's favorite dish was like the French toast. So we only ordered that.
That's the sai tosi.
Condensed milk and peanut butter.
Oh my God. Wow.
And I literally...
It's like heart attack.
I know, calories. And I was like, you know, Jackie was telling me this. And then I went home and was just like, Mom, like, that's a dish that like people eat every day. Like, why are we not eating this? And she was just like, because I gave it to you and you hated it. And I was like, I don't think that's true. Trying to debunk.
So it's like, no, moms are always right.
Yeah, tell me about it. And I like regretted it. That's the moment when I was like, what else is she right about?
Whole new world.
Wait a minute. And so that's when I was like, oh my God, I need to reconnect. Like, how much am I missing? Like, there's probably so many stories. Like, Jackie and Marina were like people that I was close to for that first year. But my family in Hong Kong, my grandparents and all my aunties, my cousins, they must have so many more stories that I will never know because I don't speak Cantonese or because I don't spend enough time in Hong Kong. And I'm only secluded to this, like, I'm only restricted to this tiny area. And I see them for like an hour. And like over 2 weeks, I was just like, oh my God, like mind blown moment where I was like, what am I missing? And I was like, there must be so much food that I've never eaten because mom was the only one who ordered and she only picked her favorite stuff, which no harm to her. Obviously, I would have picked my favorite stuff too, but how much am I not trying? And I was like, oh God. Like, I need to reset. Like, I need to try this out again. And then I was like, Mom, you got to start speaking to me in Cantonese. And she's like, you're 18 years old. Like, nothing's going to go in. And I was like, please try. And she's like, you need to be fully immersed. And at that point, I had to choose an internship. It was 6 months into my first year, and I had to choose an internship, and immediately was like, I'm going to Hong Kong. I don't know anything about living there. I don't know anything about like hotels there. Fuck it. I'm just gonna go.
Wow.
And so I applied to every hotel in Hong Kong to try and get a job in food in F&B. I got a couple of offers, which I was really thankful for, and then I landed the one at Upper House,
Nice.
and I was like, I'll take it.
It's
I'm
one
going.
of the most luxury hotels in Hong Kong, right?
Yeah. And that whole experience when I moved here and I lived here and worked there was absolutely life changing. It was
Any hotel secrets you can share with us?
hotel secrets. Ooh. Ooh.
Because you always
Now I'm
read
thinking.
you always read these articles about like, oh, former hotel staff tell you which parts in the hotel rooms are the dirtiest.
I'm trying to think.
It's like, what annoys hotel staff the most?
Oh, a noise. Well, I'm trying to think. There was it's not so much of like a secret, but it was like this funny thing that happened. Hopefully I won't get like heat for this, but when we were interns, not me specifically, but other interns. When we were interns, we had access to the POS system, so we could put in orders, right? For like we would go and take orders from like tables, and then we could like input them so that the
POS
kitchen
is
like the system where like the orders go into the kitchen and then like the orders come out.
right.
So basically, it's kind of like an iPad where you like put in an order, like dishes, and then this basically the kitchen staff like know what dishes to make and stuff. And so we would. The thing at the time where you could get like really good bread with like yogurt dip. They don't have it anymore because they've changed, but
Oh yeah.
but at the time you could, and it was unlimited. Like you could ask basically. You could ask for more bread or more dipping. And what we would do is the other interns would do
Not you.
not me. We would fire extra bread, and then one table needed one bread, but we would fire two, and then we would keep it in the back so we could snack.
Wow.
And we would be like, and then we realized how well it worked because no one noticed, so we started doing it with like other things, with like desserts, and we were just like, oh, what if we do like 2 of the blueberry cheesecakes?
I'm actively thinking about beeping this whole part.
Not me, by the way, other interns.
Do not do this.
Also, if you send food back and you haven't eaten it, chances are the interns were probably eating it in the back.
Wow.
The food was really good, and it was going to waste, which brings me to my next topic.
Exactly. But before we move on
Yeah.
to that next topic, right? I mean, you worked as an intern in Hong Kong. Eventually, you moved to Hong Kong. Because it was kind of like growing up as a kid, you did not have much exposure to, like other Asians or people from Hong Kong, or like you mentioned, right? You only saw that like tiny part of Hong Kong. So when you moved here full time, did you ever experience that kind of like reverse culture shock?
Oh, I had so much reverse culture shock, but it was with sustainability actually. And I thought it was going to be language barrier. I thought I was going to, like, I had picked up some Cantonese when I lived here on internship. And so, like, we had some tables that were like Canto speakers only. So, like, I started to pick up quite a lot. Like, being immersed, you tend to. And, like, I had heard it through my mom, but I'd never really spoken it back. So I can understand a few things, but I can't. Like, I'm not able to like pronounce it properly when I speak. So I'm working on that. But the reverse culture shock was by far sustainability. Like it was, and I remember the exact moment too, because I was so used to like in Switzerland, everything's so green. Like you have access to so much recycling facilities. You have access to like you recycle 13 types of plastic. I don't know if you know that there are 13 types of plastic. You can recycle all of them in Switzerland, and they're separated. PET bottles, it's not like the cap and the lid, they're separated. The cap and the bottle are 2 types of plastic, and you can separate it. Composting is free for everyone. Taxes are put on garbage. How much garbage you throw away, you get taxed. So you're encouraged to reduce how much garbage you have. You can recycle oil. You can recycle batteries. Like you can recycle car batteries and batteries. you can recycle drone batteries. Like they have
Wow.
everything. And I was so used to that system because it's so accessible that when I moved here, I started like naturally, like when I was living here, I started separating like my garbage. And then I remember trying to like find a place to recycle, and then it like dawned on me that you can't recycle everything. And I was like, wait, what do I do with this then? And I remember the girl at the recycling place, because I could only recycle like a third of my stuff, and she goes, "Those stuff you can't recycle." And I was like, "But yes, you can. This is recyclable stuff." Like it was like aluminium cans and stuff, and I was like, "Yeah, you can." And at the time, like in 2019, before the 6 green centers came in, they were like, "No." And I was separating. Oh my god, you'll laugh, but I was separating cardboard with newspapers because it's two different types of papers, FYI. And I was separating it, and she was just like, "It's paper," and I was like, "Wait a minute, no." And then I had like a bag of compost, and I was like, "What do I do with this?" And she's like,
It's like, that's rubbish.
"That's trash. That should be in the bin." And I was like, oh, "No, wait a minute. I did not go through all this effort for it to be thrown away casually." And she's like, "No." So that was by far the biggest shock. I remember standing there going, "What do I do with all this trash?" And she's like, "Oh, there's an orange bin outside. You can throw it there." Like the street bins. And I was like, "What?" That's a public bin. Like, aren't I gonna get taxed for that? She's like, "Taxed?"
It's so hard to find recycling options in Hong Kong. I mean, I know now it's a little bit better, just a little bit, but then I have been trying to declutter my home, and there are just so much stuff that I'm like, I don't think this should go into the trash, but I also don't know where to like donate it or recycle. So, I mean, after this recording, I need to ask you.
But it's actually so bad. Like the sustainability here, it's so tragic. And it really like it hurt me so bad because I had to unlearn so much. And it was things that were like actually engraved in me. Like, and I didn't notice until I was so limited with things, and I was like, "Oh my God, now I gotta like undo all this, and I gotta relearn what I can like recycle." Yeah, no, it's not great. I mean, thank God for places like Slowwood and Live Zero that
Hmm.
actually like make an effort and have like package free shops. So I'm used to that. Like I was quite used to that. In Switzerland, we have loads of those. And a lot of the major supermarkets are changing towards package free, which is quite handy. But here at like Welcome, you have like, I'm not even gonna start, but
Like
plastic covered everything.
it's not even natural for people to buy refills for like detergent or
Yeah.
stuff. Like people, I guess it goes back to a bit of that like Chinese or Asian culture as well. Like they like things brand new. But I mean, you realized, I mean, you had this like reverse culture shock of like how backward Hong Kong is about like sustainability, right? Was that the moment that gave you the idea to start your enterprise, Chomp?
100%. Yeah, it started during COVID. That's when we really saw the acceleration of the problem. Obviously, COVID had a major impact on F&B in Hong Kong. I think it was much worse here than in other places, but I always wanted to do something in sustainability. I was living a pretty low waste life in Switzerland. I had changed my entire bathroom routine to be plastic free. And then, like I said, when I moved here, I had this major reverse culture shock, and I was like, "Oh God, I can't live like this. Like this is my eco anxiety is way too high. I can't deal." And I wanted to do something there when COVID happened, and a lot of my friends in the F&B industry were really struggling. Some of them were losing jobs, most were getting pay cuts. 2 restaurants were closed that my friends were working at, and I was like, "Okay, this is this is not great. No, maybe we should figure out something like how we can help them." And then that's kind of like how the two linked together. And so we started brainstorming. So my co-founder at the time, Chris, and I started brainstorming on like how we could do this. And finally we came up with like some sort of app that had already existed in the US. And we were like, okay, let's try and copy or at least follow this model. We tried to do market research, and we interviewed like 200 people I say interviewed, but they answered a survey, like 200 people to see if this would be something that they would want. And, we try to change the model a little bit. And we were like, oh, like, would you want something that's like offline? Would you want a website? Like, would you be interested in buying food that's discounted? That's always an interesting topic in Hong Kong because, like you said, people want things brand new. Would you be interested in discounts? Would you be interested in being more sustainable? These were all questions that we had no idea because we live in a very like expat side part of Hong Kong, so we didn't really know. And then the results came back and it was answered, like some of it was answered in Chinese because it was bilingual. And some of it was answered in Chinese. And we were like, okay, it looks like people want an app and it looks like people are interested in buying discounted food. We could probably do something here. And so we sort of piloted and built Chomp into, not what it is today, but into some sort of like MVP. Like a viable product that we could actually like test and see if it worked. And yeah, but the whole point of Chomp was to support the local F&B industry because that was the one that was so badly hit by COVID. And the government had such bad restrictions on them, like 6 p.m. dining curfew and 2 people dining. Like it was, yeah, that's a whole other topic.
I know. And so the app that you started, Chomp, it essentially kind of addresses two issues, right? Like food waste and also supporting the F&B industry, especially during the pandemic, hoping, that there could be some extra income for them. But for those who aren't based in Hong Kong, can you walk us through how Chomp works?
Sure. It's pretty straightforward. We try to make it as simple as possible. In Hong Kong, we have a lot of food apps, so we had to make it really simple. Essentially, the way it works is that once you download the app, you get access to about 125 of our F&B partners. And these places, they have food surplus. So food that they have too much of at the end of the day, or maybe they've made too much, or maybe they're changing their stock. And that they are just replenishing and they're trying to get rid of the final parts, or it's season items. And essentially what they do is they package it into what we call a mystery box. And it's discounted. It's always going to be discounted on Chomp, at least 25% off. And then customers, they get to choose a store and then order a mystery box, and then they head to the store and pick up. So whenever you're ordering from Chomp, you're essentially rescuing food from going to Hong Kong's landfills. So every time you order, you're essentially doing a really good deed at a really good price. And because it's pickup only, you're saving carbon emissions from delivery. So you're doing an even better deed. So it's kind of like a win-win-win situation. So that's the app itself.
And so far, like we mentioned earlier, in Hong Kong, this market could be a bit tricky. It also applies to a lot of secondhand clothing stores or like even markets that sell secondhand items. So people might think, oh, like, are you selling leftover food? I mean, are there any like initial comments from people or any misconceptions around food waste?
So many. We still call it food waste, but we're slowly pivoting into the word food surplus, just because it has like such a negative connotation. But yeah, when we first launched, we had a couple of people asking if it was going to be like that half-eaten steak from the restaurant that's going to be packaged in a takeaway box. I was like, really?
That's going to the interns, right?
Yeah. That's coming home with me. I mean, not me, the other interns.
Not you.
Sorry. No, we had a lot of that. We had, is it moldy food? We had, is it going to be the food that's been wilting all day in the window? And I was like, do you know the lifespan of food? That steak one was really funny. We even made a social media post about it where we made a joke where we were like, it's not that half-eaten steak, because it was just such a wild thing to assume. But no, it's perfectly edible, untouched. Think of it as, those like Maxime stores that have like cake in the window, and those are not for sale, but they are technically display cake. They're perfectly edible. Nobody's touched it. Think of it as that going in the mystery box, because when you buy a cake from them, you don't buy the one that's sitting in the window. You buy the one that's like in the back, or the one that's in the store. And essentially those ones are perfectly edible to eat, but they're the display ones, for example. That's essentially what you could find in the mystery box.
I'm just wondering, like, what's your take on like expired foods? Because I've heard a lot of, I don't know if they are myths or like rumors about, oh, despite the expiry date displayed on the food's packaging, people say for a certain period of time after the expiry date, the food is still safe to eat. Is that true?
Yeah, so the biggest test here is going to be like your senses, your sight, smell, touch. Does it look funky? Does it smell funky? Does it taste a little weird? Like that's probably your best bet. But the rule of thumb here, and it's also the rule of thumb of like Hong Kong's food and hygiene department, if it's a best before date, you can consume it safely within the next 3 months. If it's a best before date. Now, if it's, you can also consume it a little bit after the 3 months. For example, things like cookies, they might be a little bit stale, but still safe to eat. If it's something fresh like yogurt or milk, like definitely do the test. Your senses, like your sight, your smell, your touch. And if it's an expiration date, it's probably safe. It's probably best not to touch it. Obviously test it, taste it, see if it's good to eat. Obviously don't eat the entire thing and then go, wait, I'm sick. Like taste a little bit and then go from there. But there's definitely plenty of things like pasta, for example, is okay. Things that are dry goods is usually tend to be okay after the best before date. But yeah, as a rule of thumb, and especially from Hong Kong's food and hygiene department, it's 3 month window. And on the app itself, because that's also a concern with fresh food, is if it's got something that's got a date, we ask our vendors to put the date on it. We also check that their licenses are up to date, because we made a marketplace essentially. So we don't handle the food directly. Like it's not like it's me sitting in the back of the app, like putting together the salads that you order. We don't touch the food at all. It's really like the vendors and the restaurants that deal with it. So it's within their responsibility and their interest to make sure that the food is okay and safe for you to consume as customers of their establishment as well. So yeah, rule of thumb, best before dates, 3 months. Expiration dates, probably best to stay away, but try it out first. Taste, smell, look.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I gotta say sometimes I get lazy with groceries and I would have milk that's like 2 weeks after best befores and I'm like, smells fine to me, so I would still like drink it.
Same, done that. That's when you pour, like, this is gonna sound scandalous,
It's like,
but
does it look green?
yeah. when you pour it into milk first, then cereal, just to see if it's still okay. And then you're like, yeah, no, it's safe.
Okay, great. I mean, that's confirmed by our expert.
Debunked.
But other than, like you touched on saving food, are there any other tips in terms of like living sustainably that you could introduce to, let's say, people in Hong Kong or markets that are a bit lacking on the sustainability front? Are there any like foolproof tips on how they can try to start living sustainably?
We do something that I'm quite interested in and quite proud of, is that on our social media we have Tuesday tips. So every Tuesday we share sort of our zero waste tips on how to be a little bit more sustainable with your food, how to eat more sustainably, how to eat more low waste, things like that, and how to repurpose your food scraps, which is something pretty interesting. So this can be like, doesn't necessarily have to be in Hong Kong, but you can look at it all over the world, so you can follow us and look at that. But there are definitely many ways to be more sustainable. Obviously, there's the classic, like bring your own bags. Try to order as much as you can eat. Like you can always order more, but you can't order less. Try to buy things that are in season. That's a huge thing that we tend to forget a lot, because we're so lucky in Hong Kong to have the option of having strawberries from Amsterdam and carrots from Australia, and I've never seen so many countries in one grocery store, and we're spoiled with choices, and we tend to forget that actually supporting local is a major thing. And Hong Kong actually has a lot of farms. We work with a couple of farm partners on the app, and they have the most beautiful and delicious tasting vegetables and fruits, but they just don't get enough recognition. They're not bought up by like Welcome and Fusion because they're so small. But try to find something that's closer than Amsterdam. Lower your carbon emissions. If you can take a cab and try to opt for the MTR if you have time. Reduce your carbon emissions when you can. I think some of the things that you can do is definitely in the house, like try to repurpose the food scraps that you have. Everything can have a second life. Like, for example, potato skins. If you wash it properly, and if you opt for buying organic potatoes and you wash the skins properly, you can deep fry them and make them chips. You can add them to your stock and make, flavored broth for your next soup. Hong Kong has a very big soup culture. You can use that. There are many different ways, and like storing food properly is another big thing. Freezing your food. That's not very common in Hong Kong. Like my mom had never heard of like freezing things properly. And I was like, Mom, it's pretty handy. Like we can freeze everything. And we had barely used the freezer. The freezer was used for like frozen pizzas or like frozen dumplings because we didn't want to make our own. So having leftover food, it was just like, it's leftovers.
Yeah.
We would try and eat it the next day, but like the freezer was like unheard of. And then I like was telling my mom about it, and then she got so into freezing everything to the point where our freezer maxed out that we had to buy another freezer for our basement because she was obsessed with freezing things. Use your freezer. It's really handy, and you can, expand your food life a little bit longer. So yeah.
Yeah, I definitely need to get better on that front because Hong Kong is the most expensive housing market in the world. So space is definitely very expensive, and it's not too conducive to people like doing food prep or storing food for, weeks or months on end. But definitely there are ways to work around it, which is just buy a smaller quantity and then consume it in a month. But obviously, sustainability is also in an area that's, I wouldn't say up and coming, but gaining popularity in terms of as a career choice for a lot of younger people, because younger people also care about making impact with their work. So I'm just wondering, what are some of the areas in the sustainability space that are badly needing talent, and how one can get their foot in the door?
That's a super good question. As someone who doesn't have exactly a background in sustainability, as in I didn't study it, and I don't have a master's in it. I wish I did, but I don't have a master's in it. It's a really interesting industry. There are so many types of subcategories. Like food waste is one of them. But there, like, since we started Chomp and we've met people in the industry and sustainability, there's so many pioneers who are like killing it. Like Anushka at Breer is doing the most incredible thing by turning bread into beer, like leftover bread. Shocking. It's so crazy how she does it, but and she also doesn't have a background in sustainability. She went to HKUST. And then there's like people in fashion, which I didn't even know was an industry that had that much waste. But then there's like plastic. Plastic I've mentioned a few times because it's like one of the biggest problems in the world. But then there's oil. Then there's mechanics. Then there's computer e-waste. Then it goes on. And like, last October we were at Rethink, which is like the biggest sustainability conference in Hong Kong. And there were so many different types of businesses that were all on a mission to try and reduce and to be more sustainable and to change the way that we live, and to make the world just a tiny bit greener. But they were all in various industries. It was like automobiles, and it was like food, and then it was like supply chain, farming, like all these different types. Like we deal with food at the end, like once it's already made. But then there's like startups that deal with food in the kitchen. They deal with food like right before. Soil, like Zero Foodprint handles soil and like carbon in the soil, which is way before food is even grown. There's so many subcategories, and like the industry is massive in the sense that there's a lot of different things, but not compared to like banking or something. So I think if you're a young person who wants to step into the field, honestly, do it. Take the leap. It's the greatest thing I've probably ever done. I would not change it for the world. And there are so many interesting people, and sustainability is constantly changing. There is new data coming out all the time. There is new technology. There are new solutions all the time. And like, this is the space to be in at the time, because this is a really pivotal moment in our lives where I'm going to start tearing up. Because it means so much. But this is a very important part of our lives when we're trying to change the future for our kids and our grandkids. And if you're hesitating, just do it. It's something that's really meaningful and it brings a lot of joy because you know that it's going to make an impact.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And I mean, because of my work, I also had to look into anything that's related to sustainability a little bit. And I was just having that moment where like you were first introduced to like Asian cultures. I'm like, wow, like this world blew my mind because it's not just saving plastic, saving the environment, but it's also like there's so much that you could do in this like powering a whole like disaster struck community with EVs. That's one of the very specific examples. But then by the way, like if we can do more climate actions, then there will be, you know, not as much disaster. So I mean that's like a whole like completely different discussion. But then there's also so much about like, you know, energy management, energy storage, clean energy or clean mobility is not just like EVs, but like it could be thinking about something like fuel that's like by hydrogen and stuff like that. So it's just a lot of it that could be explored, and they could also be quite obscure as well sometimes. But do watch this space if you're a young listener and you would like to make a difference in the world. But now it's time for us to move on to the next segment, which is called Rapid Bias. Now, in this rapid bias, we are going to ask Carla some biased questions that she's got asked at some point in her life. So, Carla, are you ready?
I'm so ready.
All right, let's go. First question. You are not really Chinese or Hong Konger.
Got that all the time. Which, if I was under 18, I would have been very happy because I was trying so hard. But the older I got, especially after 18, when I was at uni, and, you know, I was hanging out with my friends and then, you know, I had the comment that was just like, you're not really Chinese, like, why are you hanging out here? We had this like multicultural, like this thing called Fête Universelle, which is like this multicultural day. And there was like a Hong Kong stand. And everyone there was like, there were like 30 kids from Hong Kong, and we like set up the stand and like we made food from Hong Kong. Like we had char siu and like egg, like dan tat and stuff. Like it was so cool. And then, you know, this one guy came up to me and was just like, what are you doing hanging out here? You're not really Chinese. And I was like, I mean, no. And I was like, I felt a little hurt actually. And I was like, no, but I am. Like, and then I was like, but I am. Like, but I am Chinese. Everything says I'm Chinese. Apart from my language skills, but like my passport and my race, I was like, I am Chinese. And I was like, I know I look real white. But I'm Chinese.
Kids are so hurtful.
I know, tell me about it. So yeah, that comes up a lot.
And the next question is, a foreigner like you won't understand.
I get that too. So, I mean, because of the way I look, unfortunately. Also, my hair is really curly because of my Italian genes, which makes me look definitely not that Asian. And it's also changed color into like a light brown, so it doesn't really help either. So I always get like a foreigner. I'm like, yeah, okay, I get it. Like I get it that I got to Hong Kong in 2019. Like I get it, but enough now.
Were you addressed as foreigner more in Hong Kong, or like
So much.
even when you're back home in Switzerland?
No, in Switzerland I always looked Asian. Like, I mean, I was always told that I was Asian. And, you know, I was always identified as Asian, and they would always make comments that I'm Asian. When I was here, I always got foreigner. Guai Mui.
Yeah.
And I always. And, you know, even if I like, because I can like somewhat order at a restaurant. And I would always get like, oh, like, Guai Mui. And like, they would
Be
always.
so shocked.
Yeah. And they'll be like, oh, yeah, like just a foreigner. And I was just like, I'm really trying though. Like, I'm really trying. Mom would be proud.
Now, the next question is, ew, I don't want to eat leftover food.
heartbreaking. It's not leftovers. It's surplus. The stuff that you find on Chomp. This happens often when I try networking and I try to explain what Chomp is. And, it's really hit or miss. I get some people who are like, God, that's amazing. Like, that's really cool. And then I get some, and it's usually the older gentlemen. And they'll say, oh, I don't really want to eat leftover food. And it's like, it's not quite leftover food though. And they're like, no, it's okay. You don't have to explain further. And it's like, if I could just interject and just tell you that it's not really leftover. And they're like, but it's leftover from the end of the day. I'm like, okay, sure. You make a point, but I'm just trying to tell you that it's perfectly edible. Like it's good. Like it's good quality food. It just so happens that it never got sold that day. And I like try to make it a discussion and it's very like brick wall. Like there's no convincing this guy. There's no convincing anybody. And it's just like, okay, you know what? Anyway, are you actually going to use the app? Probably not. So thank you for your time. Yeah.
Now, the next question. Why do you look like that?
I don't know. I don't know why I look like this. I was born this way. No, I look so funny as well because, like I said, my hair is really curly. I'm also 180 centimeters tall, which is unheard of for someone from Hong Kong. So I stand out quite a lot. And I don't look Chinese here. I don't look white in Switzerland or like abroad. And it's not just, I get it in like multiple countries. Like, why do you look like that? And I get compared a lot to like random, like, oh, are you Filipina? I got that like 4 times last month, by the way. And I would be really honored if I spoke like Tagalog or something, but no, I'm sorry, I'm not. And then I get like the most random ones. Like I was walking with my sibling the other day, who looks quite similar to me because we're both like mixed race, and their name's Sari. And someone went up to them and was just like, "Are you Mexicano?" And Sari's just like, "No." Like really shocked and was just like, no. Like, oh, sorry, you look like my friend, but he's Mexican. And Sari's just like, what? And then I've gotten the most. I had like Tahitian the other day.
Oh wow.
Maldives. I was like, wow, I wish. Like that would have been like
Wow, people are going wild.
Polynesian, yeah. I was like, Chinese.
And the next one is, what is this helper doing here?
Oh my god, the helper. So the helper comment comes from going back to Italy and like visiting family there, and my mom being with us and my dad being occasionally either not in the picture or late to family gatherings, and so I would go. By the way, my sibling and I are both fluent in Italian, and so we're able to communicate with our extended family, who are like only a few of them speak English, but most of them are like Italians. And so we'll go back, and then like mom would bring us in through the door, and like one of my cousin's wives or something would come up to us and be like, oh, it's so good to see you guys, like long time no see. And then they'll go up to my mom and be like, what are you doing here? And she's just like, what? And she like doesn't speak a lot of Italian. She's fluent now, but like at the time she didn't speak that much, and she would just be like, huh? And they'll turn to me because I spoke Italian, and they'd be like, why is the helper here? I'm like, you mean my mother? Wait, helper? No. And this happened multiple times, by the way. And like, I don't know if people were just forgetful or they were trying to be insulting, and it happened like when we went out too. Like when we went out, and they'd be like, oh, like they would go to my dad and be like, is your wife coming? Or like come up to me and be like, is your mother around? It's like, my mother is here next to me. It doesn't help that she's also like 150 centimeters tall, so we look so different. We look like totally unrelated people. And yeah, so we always got this like helper comment. So insulting as well, because it was just like, even if I tried to defend, like at some point there's just no saving it, because they'll just keep making the comment, or they'll just make a comment to somebody else, or like there's only so much education you can put on someone who's so like low like that.
You can't fix ignorance, or it's hard to be fixed.
100%, yeah. So.
And the next one is, did you bring back COVID to Switzerland?
God, that was so wild too. All my friends know this story because it was just such a crazy thing that happened. Like, I went back to visit my parents in Switzerland at the time in January of 2020. I tried to do the smart thing and escape COVID when it first came up, and so I went back to Switzerland. I went to go see them. I ended up coming home, and COVID was just happening. But it was in Europe. It was all over the news. It was like Hong Kong hit, like mainland China hit with new epidemic, and this is when they called it like the Wuhan virus. Which was also another insult. That was just, it was everywhere. It was blasted all over the Swiss news. It was like Wuhan virus. And I was like, oh God. And then they started changing it to like China virus. And I was like, no, wait a minute. What am I going to do? Like call the newspaper guys up and be like, correction guys. And so like I remember like getting out of the car and getting into the garage, and like there's this neighbor who lives across from me. We're in an apartment complex, and there's this neighbor who like lives across the hall from us. And we've known this guy for a while, and he's about like 60 years old, like mid 60s. He's quite old. And he basically like comes over and he's just like, oh, like you back? And I was like, yeah, I just got back, but like I'm just here on holiday. Like I still live in Hong Kong. And he's like, China? And I was like, yeah, I mean, yeah, sure. And then am I gonna pick a fight with a 65-year-old? I don't know. And then he goes, isn't that big virus over there? And this is all in French, by the way. And I'm just like, I'm really too tired for this. And he's like, isn't that big virus over there? And I was like, yeah, I mean, it's not great at the moment, but like, that's kind of why I'm here. Like, I'm trying to escape it. And he's like, if you bring that thing over here, and I was like, oh, I don't want to hear this. And then he starts going on this massive rant. He starts swearing at me in French, and starts like yelling at like all these like vulgar things about like how I brought this like fucking virus over, and I'm gonna like this China virus is here, like all these like horrible things. And my dad literally had to step in and was just like, sir, can you go back? Like, can you just like go back to your apartment? He was like trying to whoosh me into the apartment, and I was like, I was so ready to pick a fight too. I was just like, you know what? If I wasn't off this 14-hour flight, I would have picked the fight with you.
You're like, hold my beer.
Let me argue with the 65-year-old.
And oh my God, finally, you know Ching Chang Chong?
I don't know if you ever had that insult. Okay.
Yeah.
Because I was saying this to my sibling the other day, and they were just like, no one's heard of it. And I was like, God, we had it so much growing up. I think they were too young, but I had it crossing the street once with my mom, and there were two guys who were like about 18 years old who were yelling at us, and they're like, Ching Chang Chong, Ching Chang Chong, and I was like, what? And I didn't understand what it was, because I was just like, what word is that? And mom was just like, come on. I'm rolling my eyes, by the way. And so that was the first time I heard it, but constant, it was like such a thing. The thing is, I don't know where it comes from. Like I've never looked into it, but like I don't actually know where it was just so insulting. And then they did the whole like pulling eyes thing.
Oh God.
And I was like, really? And then it went on for like, as soon as I heard it the first time, I noticed it so much. And it was like, ching chang, ching chang chong. And I was like, you think you're funny?
I know. I mean, I don't want to call out a specific group of people, but then in Europe, it's usually the young guys who think they are cool doing that as well.
Yeah.
But
I mean, in Switzerland, what was weird in Switzerland was it wasn't really the white guys that did it. It was like Middle Eastern, like Arabic guys. We had quite a lot of those, where I was from, and they would say that, and I was like, did you like that?
Why?
Was that cool for you? Like, are you gonna go home happy that you said that? Like, did you enjoy yourself? Like, who benefited that? Me? I don't think so.
I mean, well, thank you for going through this really difficult rapid fire segment, Carla.
No worries, anytime.
Now, yeah, I gotta make a note after the rapid fires segment that, I mean, honestly, I would not like to pick fight with anyone, but sometimes I do, after what we have witnessed during the COVID time, I do need to call out a lot of European countries a bit, because back then we would be seeing news headlines such as out of Paris. I know you loved Paris very much, but then this specific piece of news was coming from Paris, which was like during COVID time, when they were still calling it the China virus, right?
Yeah.
But then this Japanese sushi shop got attacked. I'm like, you call it the China virus, but then why did you attack a Japanese restaurant?
This is the same thing as having there was this like joke amongst like the Hong Kong girls in growing up that there was this one restaurant in Lausanne in Switzerland called in the sort of uni town that we were at, and it was called like Hong Kong Town, Hong Kong Town or something, and we would make such jokes about it because because they didn't serve like Chinese food. It was the typical European menu where it had like hot pot and sushi and pho and teriyaki chicken. and then it had like the occasional like Cantonese fried rice. But then it was all grouped together under this one restaurant called Hong Kong Town, or Beijing Town was another one. And we were just like, it had like that one was funny because it had like sweet and sour pork, sweet and sour shrimp, sweet and sour chicken. And it was like, this is the Chinese food menu. And I was like,
It's a sweet and sour town, you mean?
Yeah, let's rename this, shall we? But this is exactly what it is. It's like the connotation of like, it's not Asia, it's not a continent. It's one country that has all these different types of food. So like China virus, you mean Japan restaurant? Those two must be together.
Yeah, so I mean, sometimes it's still, obviously I can't be shocked, but then like there are moments where it's like, oh wow, it's like Europe was still going through that like really old school classic racism where they are like doing the eye thing, saying, like Ching Chong Chang, or like saying Kung Fu Jackie Chan when they come across any Asians, right? And sometimes when I discuss this with my European friends as well, I mean, I love you guys, but you guys need to understand that sometimes they would tell me that, it's like, what are you talking about? Like, we can't be racist because we're the most equal and advanced countries. Like, we got education in our system where like we were taught equality and everything. So sometimes when you're trying to tell them, like that is a bit subtle racist or like racial, they would sort of deny you and be like, no, it's not possible.
Because they've never faced racism in their life.
I know. But wow, I mean, there is so much to talk about on that topic, and we could go on for hours. But I mean, for us to wrap up this episode, you mentioned a little bit about our listeners could follow you guys at Chomp to learn more about how to live sustainably, get tips from you guys. So where can they find you?
So Chomp is at Chomp Food Waste. So CHOMP, Chomp, the sound you make when you take a bite out of something. And so it's Chomp Food Waste. And then you can also follow me, which is Carla Martinesi, Carla. A very Italian name, but yeah, follow me on there. And you can get updates on my regular eco-anxiety rants and fun memes too.
Or sometimes cringy things that happen to you in Hong Kong.
Oh my God, so true.
But finally, Carla, what does it mean to be proudly Asian to you?
Proudly Asian. It's something that I didn't really understand until, like I said, before I was 18. Before I went to uni, I honestly didn't understand. I was like, why should I be proud? Like, I'm not, which sounds so horrible. Sorry for saying. But like I had this like major battle with myself and being Asian and, being proud of it. It was not synonymous. Like I didn't associate the two together. And I grew up trying to be so white, and yeah, so I honestly was not proud. Which I can admit because I was so shamed. But as soon as I did embrace it, and as soon as all of this happened, and and I wanted to come back, and I was like, God, I want to come back. Like I want to reconnect with this. I missed 18 years of my life, like rejecting this thing. Like I don't want to do this again. As soon as that pivotal moment happened, I was so incredibly proud. Like I wanted to talk about Hong Kong all the time. I wanted to talk about my mom all the time. I wanted to talk about all the food growing up. Like she had a stack of like Cantonese cookbooks all in Chinese. And I wanted to learn from it. I like wanted to I wanted her to translate it, and I was like, let's try cooking together. She taught me how to make siu yuk the other day, and because we don't get that in Switzerland, she like taught me how to do it, and I was like, God, I wish I was like 14, and instead of her teaching me how to make like carbonara, I wish I learned this. Like, this is cool. And so I think being proudly Asian means, I mean, it means being proud, but I mean, it also means like acknowledging like the faults that you've made, and acknowledging that there was, there was a battle, there was a journey here where you had to like sort of come from. And I think it's like really connecting with who you are, and especially who your family is. That's a major part. Like, and I kept thinking, oh yeah, family is just like the people you live with. Like, they're just there. Like, they gave birth to me. Like, they're just there. To me, like, that was what family was like. But actually, family is full of culture and full of depth and tradition. Like, mom would do these, she would celebrate Chinese New Year with us. But I just thought it was like a routine. Like, I didn't understand like the actual heritage it had. I didn't understand the importance it had to my grandmother. Like now we do like tomb sweeping, and and like we give thanks to our grandmother, who has passed now. But and that's what it means. It's like being able to make amends, and being able to like come back to it, and being able to restart and reset, and like and acknowledging that you've made mistakes, but you're willing to fix it, and you're willing to go back. I think that's what it means to be proudly Asian.
Wow, this might be one of my favorite answers about what it means to be proudly Asian on the show. Thank you so much, Carla. It's just so beautiful because it's not like black and white, not clear cut. It could always be a process, a journey of realizing, reconnecting, sometimes rejecting, but still like going back to your heritage. It could come in waves. So thank you so much for your time, Carla.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I had so much fun.
That's it for this episode of Proudly Asian. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at proudly.asian for more content. We are on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Leave us a 5-star review on wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for tuning in and signing off for now. I'm Isabel Wong.